Guys, we are down to the last album of the week, and
Last
Matt, go ahead and put it into play, and then I think I take the lead.
Yep. So this is Squeeze's "Cool for Cats," coming in at number 1,646 of all time. Oh, I'm sorry, in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums. Number 161 in 1979. Number 10,759 of all time. It is Squeeze's fourth highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind East Side Story, RG Bargy, and which I don't know if this one counts as a compilation, singles 45s and under.
No.
So I'm going to say this is their third highest rated album on Best Ever Albums.
Yeah.
This is the other John special. So who
This is
better
the
to
other John
lead us off
special.
with this than John?
Yeah, man. Those other two albums, I think, are the ones that follow this, too. They're both 80s albums.
1980, 1981. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for those that are sort of Squeeze adjacent, I think where most people would be familiar with, although there's two songs on this you may know because they're relatively big hits, but Tempted is the big Squeeze song that I think American audiences in particular would know, I think, from Squeeze. So you guys know the song I'm talking about, right?
I do.
Tempted by the Fruit
I did
of
not
Another.
know that any of the songs
Tempted
on
by
this.
the fruit
Yeah.
of
Oh, that song.
Yes,
Yes, I know
yeah,
that song.
that's Squeeze.
What's
Yes,
been
exactly.
going on?
Okay,
Well,
that's
thank
very
you.
different than this album.
It is. It's and I'm familiar with Squeeze. I have one friend in particular who loves Squeeze, and I'm familiar with their work as well from a variety of sources, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I've kind of always described the Squeeze as an evolution of the Kinks, right? They write songs about British life a little bit, and then later that would be bands like Blur and Oasis, right, are kind of like a continuation of that idea. We covered Madness earlier too, who also is in that lane, and certainly even though they have a ska tinge, I think the Specials or just writing songs about British life, especially like working class British life, which I think is a little what it is. But this is sort of like if the Kinks became a new wave band, which I actually think the Kinks did become a new wave band, but they weren't nearly as good as this, version of like the Kinks as a new wave band. And that would be how I'd describe this. Now, they don't stay in that lane forever because, as you mentioned, it becomes a little bit more tied into traditional pop music without the new wave elements. But this one's got two songs that I think of are classics, right? You've got "Cool for Cats," which is sort of a infectious like earworm of a song, but in all the good ways. It's kind of got absurdist lyrics, and then "Up the Junction," which as a pop song is a very famous pop song, at least to me. And those are certainly. There's a lot of good songs on this album, but those are certainly the highlights. What's always appealed to me about Squeeze is they write extremely good lyrics. They are an excellent lyrical band. And I always feel that the music captures the spirit of what they're writing about as well. But as the lyrics guy here, I like to draw different things that, we could say good lyrics and stuff. Like Squeeze's lyrics are very good lyrics. They are lyrics that you want to read standalone and you can appreciate them. And, I'll use "Up the Junction," but that's a very bittersweet. So I don't know how much you guys paid attention to the lyrics this week, but
I did not.
it starts as like a song that's about like love. I met this girl. She fell in love with me. How improbable is that? And then, next thing you know, we were married. And like, it's kind of going in a direction, right? And then like, it just shifts seamlessly into, 2 years later, she's with a soldier and my child's gone. And, I'm trying to make light of it. And then it just sort of stops. You've got this thing and you're like waiting to hear what the last thing is, but he just leaves it hanging, which I think is good. That's why it's called "Up the Junction," right? You're kind of like, what do I do? And there's an unease to it, right? As it's going along that you can kind of hear in the music as well. This album, I was surprised because I don't think of this as something that's a whole. Well, I shouldn't say that. They write about sex a lot, but this writes about sex in almost like a more sophomoric way at times. I mean, there's a song that literally has lyrics like, "I touch myself often because I'm bored, and when I touch myself, I touch myself because of you," and stuff, and different stuff like that. There's a song about cross-dressing very clearly on this album, and once again, that's elements of maybe. We didn't get all the way there with the Kinks, right? But we certainly, we didn't do Lola, but we know what Lola is, like as a song, right? And there were songs that touched on stuff and English life as well. But this is, songs about working class British life, that are slice of life songs, just like what the Kinks did, and like I said, just like what the Britpops did later. Britpop bands like Pulp and Blur, and not so much Oasis, but Blur and Pulp really did. And as a result, I think it's also important that I note that a lot of the context of this album really popped out because of the challenging work that we were listening to this week, combined with, we've got 3 very avant-garde albums, and then we've got a chic album that is a dance album with a repetitive nature, and then a Damned album that did have diversity. But in that context, the things that popped out, like the pop sensibility, the melody, the lyrics, the focus on the lyrics, I think stood out even more than they normally would have this week. But yeah, I like this album. It is I've mentioned many times, I won't keep repeating it, that, to me, the clear kickback is the Kinks. I know Squeeze, it's a songwriting duo, right? They're like a true partnership, and that like one writes the songs and one writes the music, kind of like Elton John, Bernie Taupin, right? Like that type deal. But I know they were often kind of pitched for a while, Matt, that they were kind of like compared to Lennon and McCartney, like seriously compared to them, not like phony comparisons. And I think they were supposed to break bigger than they did. I know they were a big band in Britain, but outside of Tempted, they really didn't break here. And this is the second rock band reference I'm going to make, but Cool for Cats is a hell of a fun song to play on a rock band, by the way, if you ever get the chance. So yeah, this is a thumbs up for me. I enjoyed it.
So this album is clearly like the easiest album to listen to of the batch we had this week, but there's something about this album that I didn't get, or I was expecting, I guess, not knowing anything about Squeeze and not knowing any of the songs on this album, I was expecting it for me to like it more than I did, and I'm kind of lukewarm on it, at least on the one listen that I gave it. I totally get kind of the synth pop aspect of it. I heard some of the kind of clever lyrics. The song titles themselves kind of allude to their tongue-in-cheek or fun nature of it, and I did get some of the kind of Britishness of it, although that part I didn't always pick up on, or it wasn't apparent right away, I guess is what I'm saying. It seemed like, for me, they were trying to do too much at times, like too many sound effects, too much like chord changes, too many like elements in a song, and that was kind of the thing that turned me off. It felt like almost too frenetic at times, in a way. Although I like the 10cc album more that we talked about, that was frenetic also, but this was kind of that same side, the other side of the coin, but in like a negative way for me in some ways. A lot of this, I agree that Up the Junction was probably my favorite song, and a lot of this album reminded me of Ben Folds in a way. I don't know what it was about either the lyrical delivery or kind of the piano that's in it or something. It seems like he really kind of drawn this album. And in some way too, you give a little background about the band. I totally get why this band didn't kind of break stateside in the same way that, almost in the same way that the Kinks unfairly were not able to break stateside, but maybe the Britishness of it is kind of like something that kept the barrier up for accessibility or for Americans to listen to. It is unique and unique sounding from what we've heard, but there's other things that that are in the similar genre that I've liked more. I've also kind of responded more to the new wave stuff that we've listened to more than this, in the B-52s, Devo, things of that nature. I feel like that's kind of ahead for me, ahead of this band or of this sound in some way. I just responded to that more. So.
God, this is so weird for me because this is an album that I should love. Because
I would have thought you did, Matt.
I know. I know this is going to be my disappointing album of the week. And I think I didn't know a lot. I don't know a lot of Squeeze. definitely didn't knew less coming into this week, obviously. But I had some idea of what they were like, and I was like, okay, well, and right off the bat, I'm like, okay, it's the pop stuff. Let's do that. And while I think overall I liked it, I think it's fine, but there wasn't enough. I think Josh, you put it well, that there was almost like that they were trying too much. And there were parts of songs where I felt like they went in directions that made me go, oh, that's not a choice I would have liked them to have made. I would have liked them to do maybe a little bit of a different chord progression there. Or, I wish that minor key seemed a little out of place, kind of a thing. And it was hard to really find my groove with this record. And I agree. I think that easily for me, "Up the Junction" was the best song on this album. That was that was more of a straightforward song, great melody. That's one of those songs that kind of reminded me of like a mid '90s, like a Michael Penn type song or Matthew Sweet, kind of thing like that. I got a lot of Elvis Costello in here. That's definitely the artist that we covered so far.
He produced their most famous album.
Okay, so this
and I got a lot too. For sure.
Yeah, so there's stuff in here that's very much like Elvis Costello. I think I like Elvis Costello's album that we did better than this. Yeah. So yeah, like it's weird because and a lot of this is stuff that I like, but it's just overall it just kind of went in directions that I did not agree with, or felt like it just lost something for me. So I'm still like thumbs in the middle, thumbs up. I still enjoyed it, but I was disappointed. Maybe I'll go to some thumbs in the middle on that, because I think that this is the type of music that I normally love. But there was definitely something missing here, and but like I did appreciate, like, "Cool for Cats" was kind of an interesting song. There's a lot, probably with each one of these songs, there's like at least a couple of parts I'm like, I really like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it didn't sustain it throughout the entire song. But there were still other parts that I was like, oh, okay, that's that's all right. So when you have a whole album full of things like that, it fell a little flat for me. So yeah, I was surprised. I thought that I thought after the first listen, I'm like, okay, I just need to give this a little bit more time. And I did listen to it more, and I never really got to the next level where I was like, I'm getting this. And so, for this type of music, there's other places that I would go to. And I just thought, yeah, maybe it was a bit too much.
The Elvis Costello thing this is like trying to be Elvis Costello, but not succeeding in some way. I
mean, it's certain elements. I think it's certain elements it does, but it's also, it's not as, I don't think it's as good as Elvis Costello.
Yeah.
I like it in many ways as much as Elvis Costello, and I think the X factor that you got, like, I don't think it's going to push you over, because I know what you guys like, and so I'm saying, when I say this, I'm saying it more for myself than to try to persuade you guys, right? But I do think that Squeeze is not going to raise as high in your estimation if you're not paying attention to the lyrics, because I do think that's a large part of what makes Squeeze, right? It's I'll go back to the Elvis Costello. I'm shocked I didn't bring it up, Matt, because that's actually someone I thought that, and we covered Madness too, and I think there's a lot of what Madness does that's in this as well, in that they bend, but it's really about sort of a certain type of it's very British, and it's very British sensibilities, and much like Madness, right? Madness had a song, "Our House," right, that doesn't always sound like the rest of their catalog, but it hit in America, and the reason it hit was because it didn't sound like the rest of their catalog. Apologize there. And another band that doesn't sound totally like this, but I mentioned before, is like Blur, who really didn't break in America till they did Song 2, which stands out for sounding nothing like the rest of Blur, right? Yeah. So there is kind of like a template, you could even go so far with the Kinks, right? Now, they did have a couple bigger hits, right? That,
sure, especially
early in their career. But, Lola, which is a little different than some of the other stuff that the Kinks were doing. Mm-hmm. So there's like a maybe a disconnect for the American ear a little bit about a certain type of British
for each band.
Yeah, and like maybe a British sensibility that doesn't travel as much. I mean, even the Damned, who we cover this week, they were, to me, the most British of all the the punk band. Oh, I guess you could say the Sex Pistols too have a very British stuff, but even they were not massive in America like they were in Britain, right? Like they were like a sensation in Britain, right? Whereas in America, I think they were more just, like a cult band at the time, and then kind of grew as their influence grew. But yeah, I was higher in this album than you guys. I did like it. It's not gonna be an album I'm gonna sit here and say you didn't understand the transformatory elements of this. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the humor in the album. I enjoyed you guys said you were kind of put off by some of the choices. I actually appreciated some of the choices they made not being as traditional, because if they'd been traditional, I think the songs would have been more generic outside of the lyrics, but I think the choices they made them non-generic, which is a good thing for me. Yeah,
I could see that. I mean, it definitely it stands out, right? And I think that there is something to be said for zigging when somebody expects you to zag in that respect. But but that in and of itself isn't enough. Like I don't mind you going in different directions, but it's hard for me to pinpoint. I listened to the several, and it never made me go, yeah, okay. It made me go, yeah.
Well, and I had albums like that too. Josh mentioned 10cc, and that was like it for me. It's like I kind of see, but just isn't. And Devo is a little bit like that for me, where there's elements there. Like Uncontrollable Urge is similar to Cool for Cats as a piece on those albums in terms of what it does on the album. Now I know Uncontrollable Urge is early on the Devo album, and Cool for Cats is last on this album, so they come in a different spot. But I think they're very similar songs that they sort of frantically go by. They get caught in your head. They're hooky. But yeah, I'm not going to disagree with anything you guys are saying. I don't feel that as strongly to fight the good fight there. Yeah. But I do think there's a lot to like on this album for a lot of folks.
Yeah. I have to say, I did Cool for Cats. I kind of like that song. That was kind of, they did that weird, interesting breakdown. They did they did like an
that Jules Holland piano, because Jules Holland's in this band, right? The guy that does Later.
Was he really? Okay.
He's the piano player for
they do some sort of weird Later. Yeah, some sort of weird synthy kind of like electronic kind of thing in the middle of that. And that actually has, if you have Apple Music, they'll post videos up there, so there's like the video from that, so it's kind of funny. Like it's just the way that they're playing, the way they did that video. So it's kind of So I mean, like I said, there's elements here that I appreciate, but I think as a whole I was left flat on a lot of songs, and for for a genre that I normally really, really love, because this is like a pop. It's like a kind of like a It's very poppy, and I like a lot of pop and rock and stuff like that. But it's just a little flat, leaving a little to be desired for me.
Yeah, we've mentioned the two hits, but I think there's a lot of songs up and down this album that are very good. And one of these days we're gonna have to do a top 10 songs about masturbation, guys, because I think we're
sure
the more albums we do, the more songs I'm noticing that are about masturbating, to a point where I'm like, there's a surprisingly large amount of songs. I used to think it was kind of like I Touch Myself and Longview by Green Day were the two big ones, but now I've got a whole nother.
It's pretty popular. It's a pretty popular topic.
Like a Virgin a little
People
bit is a masturbation
Yeah.
song too,
People
right?
love
Yeah, so
getting-
So
What
there we go.
What do you think an American equivalent of this band is?
Of Squeeze?
Yeah.
So does it have to have the same effect where, like, in America they don't have a British following, or more like do the same type of music?
I think more that they're like so kind of unique, and they had a devoted following but never really caught on in the same way.
Big Star?
In Britain or in the U.S.?
I guess
Big
it could
Star.
be either. I'm just trying to think of another band that's like this. We kind of have a surprisingly mixed reaction. Maybe not surprising. I don't know.
Well, I can think of a couple. They don't sound like it, but they have the same type. The Big Star, the Replacements, bands that were well regarded. I think those are the two that pop to mind for me. A Badfinger.
Okay.
They don't sound like any of those, really.
Well, no, is that what you're saying, Josh? Sonically sound like them, or like occupy the same place as an entity?
I think more occupy the same place than sound.
I think those three bands, for me, are bands that come... I'm trying to think of like a 90s band that would be in there. Like the bands I think of from the 90s are not big enough selling acts, right? Like the Lemonheads or Not a Surf. Like they're not anywhere near as big as Squeeze was in Great Britain.
Right. Maybe
Because
like
you have to have
Cake
hits.
or
Because
something.
yeah, but Squeeze had like in the double digits of top 10 hits.
Okay.
That's the thing. We talked Madness before too. Like Madness did too, and it's kind of like for us, it's like, oh well, but I think you have to find an American act that had,
But if you
9
had
to
hits,
12 top
but if
10
you-
hits.
But if you had hits, by definition, you kind of took off.
Well, they did in that's what I'm saying. They were stars in Great Britain. I mean, they were drawing comparisons to Lennon and McCartney.
Yeah.
It's just that they didn't hit at the same level in the States. And there, like I said before, there's a great tradition of tons of bands who were massive in Great Britain, right? Like huge seminal acts there, but then they didn't mean anywhere near as much in America. And then there's the bands that weren't as big in Britain, like Coldplay, right? That were bigger here. And stuff like that. But yeah,
I also feel like I don't have a sense
Travis,
of how big,
Blur, Squeeze.
but I feel like
Madness.
I don't have a sense with some of those bands. Like I don't have a sense of how big they were in Britain versus how big they were here.
Yes.
I obviously knew Coldplay was big here, but I have no idea how big
Well,
they. I assumed they were
so-
big in Britain.
So pull up Squeeze, right, on Wikipedia, and the first thing you'll notice is, through all their albums, they're like, was a top 10 hit, was a top 10 hit, hit number 2, hits, and like you guys like actually said, like, I don't know, Up the Junction and Cool for Cats. I think those are songs that, but we've gone through this before, like, Matt, the Specials were kind of like an unknown entity for you, whereas they're like part of the canon in Great Britain. They're not this niche ska band, right? They're like a band that played Top of the Pops like 5 times in 3 years in Great Britain. So like there is that element. And even the Britpop stuff, Pulp and Blur were huge in Great Britain. And then later crappier versions of it like Travis and stuff were too. But it really was only Oasis that
Crossed over.
Yeah, they
crossed
sure did.
over, and they were in many. It's because they sang about the stuff that was like least British, right? They just did big pomp and circumstance,
And they were gigantic assholes, and we
Well,
like that.
Well, and their lyrics are like about nothing. I like Oasis,
Yeah,
but
their lyrics are bad. I even know that, John. I can even tell you that.
It's like I'm feeling supersonic. Give me gin and tonic. It's fine, but they're all about melody and like how the songs sound, right?
Which is why I love them.
And is also why they translated out of Britain. They're not writing about like the English countryside, like literally Park Life, right? Is about that. So and Pulp, Jarvis Cocker's doing nothing but making very British observations. So so there you go. But yeah, did you pull up Squeeze, because you'll see that's like they had like jillions of top 10 hits. So
Okay. Yeah, something. Yeah, and like Matt said, this is my final point. It's easier to think about bands that were famous there that weren't famous here versus the opposite, because we're not in Britain. We didn't grow up there, so. Yeah,
like the only one I know of right off the bat that's a British group that was more popular here than there is Coldplay, for sure. I think Coldplay was looked at as sort of like a warmed over version of lots of things that there were, whether it be Radiohead or like the remnants of Britpop and stuff, and then they, for whatever reason, and I'm not even knocking Coldplay. It just there's a lot of bands that
and you marry Gwyneth Paltrow, and you're in the tabloids, and the Americans love that too. So
is that what it is? Because it's
part
like
of it, I'll bet.
Yeah, for sure. So, but yeah, so all right. Well, I think that might put